Welcome back to Performance Process, the podcast that breaks down some of the processes behind the world's best performances so that you can apply them to your own riding, hopefully go faster and more comfortable as such. Aerodynamics are a cornerstone of modern cycling performance, but how much of what we hear is genuine science and how much is carefully packaged marketing? Of the actual science, how much applies to us, the individual and very random human, and our own very random everyday riding? Manufacturers make bold claims about watts saved and times gained, but the reality is often far more nuanced than that. In this episode, we sit down with Xavier Disley, director at Aerocoach, to explore a framework for deciphering Aero claims and sorting the wheat from the chaff in the Aero marketing. From testing methodologies to how manufacturers present their data, we'll explore the hidden side of aerodynamics in cycling. We'll discuss the red flags in Aero claims and which, if any, we can take at face value. By the end of this conversation, you will have a clear understanding of what's real when it comes to Aero gains and where marketing spin sometimes creeps in. With that, let's jump into the show and welcome Xavier Disley back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem at all. Nice to chat again, Ronan.
Yeah, our last episode went down really well, so I'm well. I always look forward to our conversations, but I'm especially looking forward to this one also. Before we delve into it, it is only a couple of months ago since we recorded that 2-part series, but it already seems like Aero interventions, let's say, have come on, and I don't know if it's leaps and bounds or if they've gone back in time or whatever since we last spoke. But on that show, you told us that the specialized Evade helmet works quite well and tests fast for many riders in a road position. Since then, we've seen Visma Lisa Bike using a Giro Arrowhead 1 time trial helmet in road races and in road positions. And I'm curious, have you ever tested the Arrowhead 1 in a road position, and how does it test?
So we do this for track bunch riders, because obviously on the track you're allowed to do, I say on the track, you're allowed to wear whatever helmet you want. The UCI don't stipulate anything. If you want to wear a POC Tempo or an Arrowhead 2 in a road race, there's currently nothing stopping you from doing that. So on the track, yeah, we've tested a whole range of helmets versus road helmets, and there's a big advantage to wearing an Aero helmet in a road position if you're in the drops, or even if your head's stuck up directly in the wind. And I think the Arrowhead stuff with Visma is not really as new as people might think, because UNOX were doing this last year, and they all had like Aero road helmets, their sprinters. And people like me, even the early Giro Air Attack, which is like the round bowl helmet with the visor, when that came out, and that was years and years ago, it was obviously there to improve aerodynamics at the expense of looking a bit different from everyone else in the peloton. I remember I think it was a funny clip of Bernie Eisel playing the bongos on someone's Giro Air Attack and riding alongside them in the peloton. Because it did look a bit different. But yeah, sorry. So yes, there is a step up, right? So let's say you've got a bad road helmet, and we'll call a bad road helmet something that doesn't have any aero features to it. It's not designed for aero efficiency. It's designed for cooling or lightness or whatever. There is a step up from those to an aero road helmet, and there is another step up still to wearing more of an aero helmet, a traditional aero helmet in a road position. That you don't have to be in the aero bars for these things to work well.
Before everybody rushes out to grab a POC Tempo or something like that for a road position, the chances are a longer tail time trial helmet like the Tempo or like any long tail time trial helmet isn't going to work as well in a road position where you have to look around you and your head might be more. You could be moving your head more than you would in a time trial position.
Yes. I think that in general, you are looking forwards most of the time. So I'd say that you probably get away with it. A POC Tempo is a bad choice just because visibility and things is solid. So I think you'll struggle to make that quick overall. To give a personal example, right? So on the track, in my bunch bike, I used to ride a Laser Victor, which is a short-tailed helmet, it's like a, fully closed, not many vents on it. In fact, I don't think it's got any, with an integrated visor. And I now ride a Casque Mistral, which has got a tail on it. And even in like slightly different head positions, head up, head down and things, the Mistral's quicker. So, it's if you were really going to go for it, then a full-on Aero helmet with a tail probably still would be quicker, even if you are looking around occasionally.
So what you're really telling us then is just that Visma have, let's say, opened up the option to a gain that was already there, and just kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think made it a bit more public because the riders are a little bit more high profile. As I said, X were doing it before. So, but Visma, people have made a bigger deal of it now. The thing is, you're going to struggle a little bit because this teams are so sponsor driven. Apart from some teams which have got a little bit more flexibility over these things. I mean, you can see France Page de Jeux, for example, and TTs can run whatever they want. And Little Trek in the past have done similar things with their riders. So if your sponsor doesn't really make a helpful helmet that could be used on the road, because the Arrowhead I'd suggest is actually all right as a road helmet because you can take the visor off and you can put sunnies on and it's not long tail, so people aren't going to freak out too much. But if your helmet sponsor only makes a gigantic helmet that's going to be very pointless, then it's probably they won't do that. So it'll depend on the sponsors and the riders as well. Like the riders just might not want to do it. Cooling perspective, most aero helmets are not great for cooling. So you've got there's loads of considerations I think to stop people from instantly adopting a similar strategy.
Well, getting into today's discussion, we've discussed aero testing and where to focus your efforts in that previous podcast we did. We're here today to talk about aero marketing and I guess to try to create a framework we can all use in deciphering aero claims. Perhaps the best place to kick us off is in asking, are there still some dodgy practices in aero marketing, and are some manufacturers manipulating testing or data for marketing purposes?
Yes. Obviously people are going to want to display their products in the best light possible. I would say up until recently, people have been pretty good about, not going OTT with these things. The elephant in the room is To Engineering, who came out with some data, which was just frankly wrong. And everyone's seen how dishonest it was for them to publish the data that they have done, saying that their bike was 150 watts more aero than a specialized SL8. Everyone could see through it. It wasn't even their data they were trying to refer to. And there's all sorts of problems with that, not only from the reasoning behind why on earth they thought they could do something like that, but also what it does for the consumer in terms of trust in aero as a concept. Because if you're doing good work and you're coming out with something that you've spent ages on and you've made a X% improvement over something else, maybe your previous product, or you've compared it to a competitor, and it's all legit and all your data is great and you've made a 1 or 2, 3 watt improvement. If someone comes out and says, oh no, but ours is 150 watts better, then suddenly your stuff looks rubbish by a factor of whatever. And so the consumer is going to think that none of it makes sense and it's all a load of crap. And so I think doing something like that is really damaging to people who are doing good work. And there's lots and lots and lots of companies that are doing good stuff. So I think, dodgy practices in aero marketing, the people doing the aero work in companies generally aren't the people doing the marketing in the companies. And so there's always going to be this kind of disconnect between what someone has, done in terms of their engineering and in terms of the improvements that they've got and what someone else will take out of it. So and I don't know, because Aerocoach is in a particular place where we do testing for other people and we will do, aero work for manufacturers. Sometimes people might think competing manufacturers, but it really depends on the product and where they're positioned in the market compared to the sorts of things that we sell. But again, we also sell stuff ourselves. And then we have to, promote our stuff with the data that we've collected in a manner that we think is appropriate for how it's going to be used. And so we do have the opportunity to at least help other manufacturers or show other manufacturers the way that we think we should do it. And so we can't be an independent testing authority because we sell stuff ourselves. But I like to think that the reason why people keep coming back to us to do stuff is because our results are legit. And there's very few of our products that have massive savings over the next thing, because you just don't see that these days. Everything is converging and you are going to get marginal gains is the word, isn't it? Is the phrase, but you are going to see marginal improvements. But in the sphere that we're working in, that's where it happens, isn't it? You can win races by 0.1 of a second or whatever. So it doesn't matter as long as you won the race.
I'm just curious if you've ever had a brand approach Aerocoach to engage your services and then it transpired that they were expecting to be able to push for or pressure for favorable results.
At what stage in the process? Before, because if we find...
That sounds to me like it's happened at every stage.
We've had instances where I've got a vibe that might be happening, and therefore you don't engage. We get a lot of questions from people want to do testing with us, and we're very happy to. We are rammed at the moment, so we're not able to do hardly any external testing. But in years past, and whatever, like we have had situations where it was pretty obvious that people wanted their stuff to be quicker, and we just don't even bother. Like we're not. That's not what we do. We have had situations where we've been to the tunnel and people have had results that they're not particularly very happy with. But generally speaking, by the time we get there, we've weeded out the people who are trying to be disingenuous. People just don't publish the results, which we're totally fine with. And we've never had someone go to the tunnel, we've got results, and then we've seen them lie about it. It's never got that far, like absolutely not. And I think if people are contracting us in particular, because we try to be quite open with the testing that we do, and we try to release testing results and things, I don't think we're the right people to go to if you want to try and rig your data. Because it's pretty obvious. It should hopefully be obvious by now. You're not going to get away with that. We're as independent as we can try to be. And so the fact that this is, we've had bad vibes only a few times in the past and it hasn't even got to that stage is hopefully an indication that A, it's not really happening that much, which is what I hope. And B, we're the wrong people to go to if you're after that anyway. So, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
I mean, yeah, it's important that we know, like you do have a bias and a bit of a conflict of interest in this whole conversation. But part of the reason why I invited you on to have this conversation was because you have like a conflict of interest in both directions, in that you do aero testing for individuals, but you also develop new products. I think it's impossible to find a truly independent expert in this space, but at least you've got a foot in each camp, was kind of the way I looked at it.
Yeah. And I think that at least people who've been to sessions with us or who've done aero work, whether it's companies or individuals or whatever, will know that we don't rig the data. Like you can't. We'll have people sat over your shoulder looking at the numbers, and you can't mess with that kind of thing. And so I like to think, at least this is how I try to, I hope that we're portrayed as independent as we can be. So if you do see a piece of data coming out from us that you can trust it, obviously I'm going to say that. But here's a good example. So the rolling resistance stuff. So all the road rolling resistance data, like we don't make a road tire. We might be doing track stuff. Well, we are doing track stuff, but the road rolling, we've got no skin in the game there. Like it's absolutely, we have this bank of data that we use for determining the right kind of tires to sell with our wheels. But there's no skin off our nose to chuck it on the website so other people can see it, rather than just being like a secret Excel spreadsheet.
One of the questions I have later is the whole tire and wheel interaction and all that. From what you just said, can I take that when you're developing a wheel, you will develop around the fastest tire regardless of what that happens to be, rather than picking a tire and developing around that? Yeah,
so we find the fastest tire first, and then you develop based on that. So our very original wheels from up to this ages and ages ago, we started this process and we found the Corsa Speed at the time was the quickest tire. So the whole wheel range was designed around the Corsa Speed. These days we have to test around Corsa Pro Speeds and GP5000 TTs, because they're both, one's aerodynamically good, one's rolling resistance good. They kind of come out similar-ish. Future stuff that we're doing is based around those two tires. But we don't have to, like at Schwalbe, the new Schwalbe Aerothan is amazing, for example. The road tire they're doing, we developed stuff around that. The Michelin was a bit better than we'd be developing around the Michelin. So we're kind of independent from that perspective. And we just need to know what the right answer is. So we have to do the homework to find that out.
On that then, you're describing a process where you test and develop. Are there brands who effectively do the opposite, where they develop and then test and then find results that are favorable for what they've already developed? So often I see what appear to be finished products in the wind tunnel, and I kind of say to myself, what's the point in bringing it to the wind tunnel at this point where you're about to start selling it? Is that just to find some gains to attribute to it?
Yeah, I mean that's a pet peeve of mine when you see someone claim, "Oh, this has been tested in the wind tunnel," and it's just like anything can be tested in the wind. You can put a brick in there, right, and it's been tested in the wind tunnel, and it just feels a little bit like they've been putting it in there for a marketing shoot. So yes, absolutely. You see that. quite a bit, where people have finished a thing and then they bang it in the tunnel and get some numbers against, I don't know, whatever. And the thing is, there are different ways that you could approach that. You could test it against something that's horrendous, and then obviously theirs is quicker by X amount, their products. Or you could test it against something really good and then just not tell anyone what the data is, but it's still been tested in the wind tunnel. So it's a tricky one for the consumer to get through. It's quite nice that wind tunnel testing is a bit more ubiquitous now, because in previous years, it wasn't as accessible for manufacturers. Whereas now, someone can come to a wind tunnel, and there's, quite a few around the place, or they can come to a consultant and say, can you evaluate our products? And we get people doing that, we've tested products that haven't seen the light of day, where companies have come to us and said, can we test this? We test it. Not great. And then they've gone away and worked on it. And that's what you want them to do. What you don't want to do is for them to test a product and claim that it was all developed in the wind tunnel. And that wasn't. Yeah.
I guess the main question here is, like, so truth engineering aside, I think the data that they presented that I looked at was a mix of seemingly testing done in Valencia, testing done with their own indoor trainer setup, and testing done by Cycling News in a wind tunnel in England. And that, there's all sorts of flaws around merging all that data together and trying to make one assumption from it. Aside from all that, are there any other examples that you have seen of Aero data being manipulated purely to, like, boost marketing claims, I guess?
I think the manipulation obviously has a negative context. And I'm in a position where, you're criticizing a choice that someone's made, but it's probably for them a decent choice. And I don't know if that sounds a bit garbled, but the new Trek bike is a nice example of a thing where they've given you all of the data for you to make your own.
Which one's this, sorry?
So the Trek Gen 8 Madone.
Okay, yeah.
They've given data on it based on the previous Madone and the previous Emonda. And they've given you every single piece of component on the bike, and they've used a pedaling mannequin, which is a great way of doing it. And what it shows is that the new water bottles on the bike are great. But the bike itself, if you took the water bottles off, appears to be slower aerodynamically than the old Madone, because they tested the new Madone with the new bottles. They tell you separately that the new bottles speed up everything, and they tested the old Madone with round bottles. And if you take the difference that they tell you that the new Madone is faster by using the new bottles, and you apply that to the whatever, right? So the point of that bike, though, isn't for it just to be the most aero-like possible. And I think that this comes back to what you were saying earlier, is that really what we want, is for a bike in particular, and handlebars is a good example, integrated handlebars. Do you want your road bike to only be the bike that wins the wind tunnel test? Or is that bike actually doing something more for you than that? Is it providing you with the comfort to be able to ride for more than 10 minutes without wanting to kill yourself? So I think if the new Madone, and I haven't ridden it, if it is substantially better as a race bike or as a training bike or whatever than the old one, and it's roughly as aero, then happy days, you've got a winning combination, haven't you? If the bike is less aero and it's worse, then obviously that's a bad thing. But they have given you the data for you to, they've added the bottles in to make it look better, that you can't deny that. And, but they have shown you that that's what they've done. They've split out every single little bit of kit on the bikes, to show that that's what they've done. And the Emonda, they're saying it's more aero than the Emonda, but they had slightly shallower wheels. So they did another test with slightly deeper wheels, the Emonda, and showed you that's what they did. So I think that's quite a nice way of, like, at least if you are going to slightly, try and favor your bike, at least tell people that's what you've been doing. And I think there's from another side of it, like the data on the new Seeker Spear is something that we did for Seeker as a independent testing body for them. And if you look at and they published everything, and this is a nice example of doing it right. Okay. So they published the data of we had a mannequin, and the Spear was the slower bike than their previous bike aerodynamically with the mannequin, and a specialized SL8, which is one of their reference bikes that they use. They had a Giant TCR as well, which didn't test so well for them, for Giant, I mean. And then when you stuck the rider on, everything was quite similar apart from the Giant, which was a lot slower. But they published everything, and we controlled everything about that test, right? In terms of contact points, and all the wheels were the same set of wheels, and the group set was identical, and all this kind of thing. And so they weren't trying to, this is just as an example of someone who's not trying to rig the data. And I know that they weren't because we did it. And it showed that their bike wasn't a bazillion watts faster than the next thing. And if you only wanted to take their bike only data, it showed it was less aero than their super aero previous bike. But again, that's not the point of their product. The point of their product was to provide a bike that was lighter, that had a better riding experience and better compliance and all this kind of thing. So you always have to take that into account when we're looking at wind tunnel graphs and things. What's the manufacturer trying to do? Are they trying to make a more aero bike, or are they trying to make a product that's better overall? And I think sometimes you can get a little bit kind of fall down the rabbit hole of just staring at the aero number constantly. And if for the product that's not the right thing to do, then you need to bear that in mind. And really that's, to be honest, it's for bikes that rings true. Everything else you probably can, components and things probably is aero is the win. But for bikes and as you say, integrated handlebars and stuff, it's probably not the right thing to look at.
Is that the risk with this sort of testing, in that, you know, with the aero component or the weight component of a bike are the maybe rolling resistance also, but I'm going to say aero and weight are the only really objective measures that we can quantify. But actually there's so much subjectivity that comes into it when you're choosing a bike that the individual enjoys riding and loves to own, that we run the risk of, if we lean too far towards the objective measures, that actually that's not the right answer either.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's so much to a bike as a whole system that can, affect your enjoyment of it. Because for most people, that's what they want to get out of spending a lot of money as it costs these days to buy bikes. I totally agree. I think that there's so much more to it from that perspective. Different for components, I think, but for a bike as a whole.
So you've referenced the Madone there, and the sort of some of the reasoning behind that. But I'm curious if there are just any blatant examples of manipulating the data, or aero white lies, if we want to call it that.
People will do this without you knowing. Sometimes there aren't that many people that are being completely transparent with what they've tested and what they've tested it against. So the Colnago white paper on the V1 RS, the new aero bike from Colnago, is, I think, a really nice paper. It gives lots of good explanation of what they've done and how they did it, and they've obviously spent a lot of time working on it. They're not exactly telling you what they've tested it against. They're saying that it's good against a leading competitor, and you're like, what is that? Is that it's not going to be a bike from Decathlon, is it? But is it? Could they have been a bit more transparent about some of the data that they've got? And I don't understand why companies don't do this, because back in the day, it was, people were very, very happy to tell you exactly how good their bike was against exactly whatever bike they were testing it. So you had Cervelo would have graphs all over the place. Specialized would have graphs against other bikes, and Giant would do this, and Trek would do this, and the wheel companies, same thing. Head would have their graph against other things. Zip would do the same stuff, and Envy have had that as well. And I don't understand why people seemingly have moved away from saying we've tested against this, because fine, you might be telling people that their bike is also quite good, but I just feel as though it gives you a little bit more, it helps with the transparency of the whole process, and hiding leading competitor almost makes it look like you're trying to hide something, because what if your leading competitor was a bike from Decathlon? Everyone knows it probably wasn't, right? But there's the possibility.
Well, actually, on that I think that was just kind of unfortunate, confusing wording, because when I did press Colnago on who is the leading competitor, what it actually, and now we're talking about something that I wrote about 3 months ago at this point, so off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, it was like they took, I think, 5 different bikes and then assessed them over a range of yaw angles each in a wind tunnel, and then picked out the best one at each individual yaw angle, and then the Y1 RS was better than each individual bike at each yaw angle.
But that's amazing. That's why not say that? I mean, that's.
I think they did. It just didn't. It wasn't. Yeah, I don't know if it was like a language thing or whatever. But when you spoke to them, I understood that. Yeah, that's what it is. But it wasn't all that clear in the paper yet.
No, of course not. But that would be fantastic if someone had adequately showed that. And I don't think people have done that for bikes before. That would be huge. Well, okay, fine. I'm talking from my perspective, and I'm not the marketing person at Colnago. I would heavily suggest that would be way better for them than to say leading competitor, because that's a lovely way of doing it.
Well, my takeaway from it was, how realistic is this? You're better than every bike at every yaw angle. That kind of seems like the impossible.
Potentially, but at least that's data that you've collected.
Yeah.
So if your goal was to do that, and your goal was to test and refine until you had hit those markers, which I think should be the goal. And that's when we're developing products, you have markers you need to hit. And so if their goal was to do that, and under their conditions they did that, then you should surely say so. So yeah, but that's just an example of where it could be anything. And what you've just said there is potentially like absolute best case scenario. And the £300 bike from Decathlon is the worst case scenario. And the consumer just doesn't know what it is in between.
Other £300 bikes are available.
Of course.
You haven't really given me a smoking gun there or whatever of manipulating data. But I'm still curious, like, are there real world instances where aero savings measured in a tunnel or in CFD don't translate outside the lab?
Yeah, so I think the one where it's very tricky to determine is clothing. And I think that clothing is a really nice example of how tricky it is to test and understand, but also how difficult it is to determine in the real world. And you can see that people are claiming that they're saving 20, 30 watts or something with a particular piece of clothing over whatever. And you're like, right, that's a kilometer an hour. Like, are all your riders in your pro team with this clothing on suddenly riding a kilometer an hour quick? No, probably not. The empirical testing of it in the real world, like, how do you determine that? You know, if we're looking at results, it's almost impossible to do so unless you're the person who has access to everyone's power data and can back calculate CDAs and things like that. So from a objective perspective, yes, there'll be lots of things, but it'll be difficult to tease them out because no one's doing one-to-one testing in a race scenario. Everyone's done optimization of all lots of different things. The team training camps over winter when they're going to wind tunnels and velodromes to do aero testing is not just resulting in one change. It's resulting in a whole gamut of things. I think maybe not so much these days, although there are a couple of companies, claiming crazy numbers for things like socks or whatever. But I'd say maybe like 3 years ago, there was like a big jump in clothing where everyone was claiming all sorts of nonsense. And people have wound back a little bit on that now.
Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.